Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the operator meeting. We're just going to give folks a couple of minutes to jump on the meeting, and then we'll get started at 9:05. And we do have a couple of announcements today, but we'll probably start those at 9:05. That way everyone can hear those. Oh, and by the way, my sincere apologies that the email I sent said May. I'm glad that everyone got the memo that it was really today and not a month ago. And if you have any questions, go ahead and chat those in. You can usually move your mouse around and you might have to click on more to go to the chat function, but go ahead and just chat any questions that you may have during the presentations in, and we'll get to the questions at the end as usual. Everyone. And it looks like the participant number is still climbing, so we'll just give folks a couple of more minutes to get on, and then we'll start with some quick announcements. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everyone, for coming to the operator meeting today. My name is Hannah Hickam. I am the executive assistant, and I'll be running this meeting today. Just give me one moment to transition, and then we'll start with Jane and a couple of announcements. Oh, there we go. All right, Jane, are you there?
Yep, thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jane Stanzik, the permitting manager. I just have a couple of reminders, not announcement, but reminders. One is about Rule 312, which requires sundries for subsequent operations on existing wells. And the other is about Rule 413, which requires the Form 7 to be filed. Next slide, please, Hannah. So I think, a month ago, actually it doesn't look like that long ago, but I think it was like the last operator meeting, Craig Berger presented some guidance for Rule 312. That guidance was written from the perspective of the engineering and field staff primarily. It provides some details to help operators identify when a Form 4 is required for subsequent operations and when it isn't. So the parts of, go ahead, Hannah. It jumped. Next slide. Okay, thanks. The portions of the rule here that are outlined in blue are addressed in that guidance document. And it mentions the portion here that's outlined in red, but doesn't go into any detail on that. So anyway, this rule says that when you send in a Form 4 sundry for subsequent operations, that the director, and that in this case means the oil and gas location assessment staff, will review the location and consider the proposed operations, and then consider the potential for impact in the vicinity of that oil and gas location. And that takes some extra time for the OGLA staff to make that determination and to maybe engage in a dialogue with the operator to get BMPs and other things established to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife. So the bottom line is that operators should file those Form 4s as far in advance as possible. Filing it a couple days ahead or even a week ahead isn't enough time for the staff review that's required by the rule. So the reminder is we have a new rule, 312, and you need to send those sundries in as far in advance as possible. So you get them approved before your scheduled time to conduct those operations. Next slide, please, Hannah. Thanks. So here's the old rule, pre-January 15th, 2021, Rule 309 that spells out the requirements for the Form 7. And that rule said for years and years, a well must be reported every month from the month that it is spud. And now we have a new rule, Rule 413, that says the very same thing. So this is a reminder to operators that the Form 7, even though we call it a production report, it is called Operator's Monthly Report of Operations. And the rules have for years and years and years said that once you spud a well, it has to be included on your Form 7 from that month in which it's spud. Next slide. And just to help you a little bit, we have 2 status codes that apply to wells that haven't been completed, that aren't producing, that aren't shut in, that aren't TA'd. One is drilling, that's DG, and one is waiting on completion. And next slide, please, Hannah. And on the Form 7 instructions page on the website, we have this document that's been out there for years and years, Form 7 instructions, industry training slides, and that explains also that the wells must be reported on the 7 from the month they're spud, and it gives that status information for DG or waiting on. DG for drilling and WO for waiting on completion. That's all I had. Thanks. Any questions, or are we going to hold them till the end, Hannah?
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Well, it's really up to you. We have been waiting till the end. So unless you think that the 1 or 2 questions that's there just has to be addressed right now, I think we can just wait till the end.
Okay, that gives us time to come up with a coherent answer.
Yes.
Thanks,
oh yeah,
Hannah.
that's the reason for that. Awesome. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we will move right on to the next item, which is GIS data measurement accuracy and uploaded data issues with Chris Eisinger. And he's going to drive himself. So I'm going to stop share so that he can do that. And I just want to make sure that only host. Okay, so Chris, you should be able to take over. Let me know if you have any issues.
Okay, and Hannah, can people hear me? I'm concerned my internet connection, I'm on a wireless connection on my laptop, may not be that good. So if I should have some problems, I will have to stop and connect to the wired network. So I'm just warning you, if there's a problem, let me know and I will do that.
All right, we'll keep an eye on it, but I hear you fine right now. Although then it looks like he just froze, so maybe he's getting onto the wired.
Can you hear me, Hannah?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'll keep a close eye on it.
Okay, well, it just disconnected me, so I'll try this again, but here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, can you see the screen, the slides?
Yes, I can see them and I hear you pretty good. Fingers crossed.
Okay, well, I'll give it a go. So what I wanted to do is give an update to all the interested parties about the sort of some issues and some questions we've had about accuracy and data that's being submitted. This is all related to, of course, the new GIS data attachment requirements, many of which came with the mission change rules that went into effect on January 15th. We now have requirements for the following forms for GIS data attachments. That would be the Form 2A, Form 12, Form 20, 20A, the Form 44 and Form 45, as well as providing a boundary polygon for comprehensive area plans. So before I even get into that, there were some questions over the last several weeks about accuracy in data that is being provided to the Oil and Gas Commission. And to be clear, as per Rule 216, which has been there for a long time, if you are providing us GIS data that was created through a GPS survey, so global positioning survey, the accuracy must be a meter or less. This is very standard. Most modern GPS equipment has this capability. We do ask that GPS receivers that are being used, whether they're a consumer grade or a commercial survey, they should be a differential grade. And that just means that there's a differential correction applied, which will improve the accuracy during or post acquisition of the data. If you have questions, you can look at Rule 216. There's a little bit more information about it. I will comment that if you are submitting GIS data that was mapped using a non-GPS method, and this would probably be most relevant perhaps to off-location flow lines or transfer lines, so Form 44, Form 12 information. There we have specific requirements in the rules that say you can, for those things that are already buried, historical, that there's an error of plus or minus 25 feet. And you wouldn't necessarily be using a GPS surveying method to collect that data. But if you have questions about accuracy, please reach out to us. But that, generally speaking, a meter or less is what we ask for with GPS surveyed equipment. Another question we had was about the data, the reference system for data that's being submitted. And we expected the operators and asked them to submit their GIS data using the NAD 83 datum. And you can submit it in either geographic or projected coordinate reference system. If you're doing projected, we prefer UTM 13. However, we can deal with just about any coordinate reference system as long as you identify what that reference system is in the GIS data file you're submitting. If you don't have that, we have no way of knowing what you're submitting the information is, and so we cannot work with that or manipulate it. Okay, so moving on to actual GIS data attachments associated with all these forms. And I'll reference this here again, but the first thing I want to say is that there is now a new guidance document that is available. I just uploaded it to our site that has a lot of detailed information about preparing and submitting GIS data attachments. And hopefully will answer a lot of questions and clear up a lot of confusion people might have had with how to submit GIS data attachments. What I'm going to do now is just very quickly go through some of the issues that I've seen or that we've seen coming in from a number of different submissions. These are not comprehensive, these are just the most common ones. And again, if you have questions, you can ask now or reach out to me later. So first, in terms of preparing the data, with the Form 2A and Form 45, this is one of the newer forms requirements for GIS data attachments. There is still a little bit of confusion about what an oil and gas location is versus a working pad surface. There is some definitions in the rules that describe what it is in the presentation I gave in February. It also describes these. But I will say that for most all sites, the oil and gas location and working pad surface should be different. They, in rare cases, would ever be the exact same footprint. And so when you're submitting your data, GIS data attachment, you should have at least those two features as separate polygons. Additionally, we've had some operators who are providing us access roads, which is great. This is actually important information and very useful. However, they really should be submitted as a distinct feature, so a separate feature from the oil and gas location. In some cases, it's not always clear that the access road is basically part of the location, but if there's any, if the access road extends beyond the location, it really should be a separate feature. So with regards to submitting geodatabase and shapefiles, the most common problem is that people are not providing the required attribute field, which is the feature type. And that is just a field which allows us to identify what feature it is you're submitting, whether it be an oil and gas location, a working pad surface, or access road. You do need to use very specific text strings when you're referring to the oil and gas location, working pad surface, so that the information will get into our system correctly. For KML submissions, there is now information, explicit information on how to submit those in our guidance document. So with the Form 12 and Form 44, just an observation that those Form 44s in particular, people have been submitting information for a while, and generally I think have that process understood. The shape files, if you're submitting shape files, I just want to point out they are limited to a single geometry. So that would mean that if you're submitting both lines and valves, which is required for everything but the off-location flow lines, you would need to submit 2 shape files to capture all that information. If you're submitting a geodatabase, that type of file can contain different geometries in a single file, so you wouldn't need to submit separate files for those, just one. And finally, same with the Form 2A and Form 45 for KML submissions. please take a look at the guidance document. Because of the multiple attributes involved with Form 12s and Form 44s, the KML submissions are a little bit more complicated, but hopefully the guidance will describe how to do that. So the next step after you prepared your data is to zip the GIS files. This is a very simple concept, but surprisingly, a lot of people don't always get this correct. And there are some sort of specific steps you need to take. And just to highlight them, you're selecting for a shape file, you're going to select all the associated zip files, or shape files, I should say, and then zip them up, rename the file according to the instructions. What we see, or what I'm seeing, is a lot of people will take a containing folder with all the shape files and zip that instead of selecting all the files and zipping those. So again, if you look at the guidance document, and then if you have questions, reach out to us. With GEO databases, all you're going to do is just select the geodatabase folder, zip it, and then you don't need to do any renaming before you attach. Attaching the GIS file, it's pretty straightforward. You go into eForms and go to the Attachments tab and just upload and select your file. However, with the Form 2A and Form 45, there is an extra step that we've added in the last month where you need to select the appropriate attachment description from the list. This is only applicable to Form 2A and Form 45, but you would select whether it's a oil and gas location, a working pad surface, or, which is probably the most common thing, that it would be both. And so there is a selection. So if you're submitting both in the same file, you can select that as the appropriate attachment description. Again, look at the guidance documents. It spells all this out in great detail. After your data has been attached, I just wanted to highlight what happens. So basically, we start processing it as soon as you've uploaded in a draft. And we will get a notification, our staff will get a notification saying that you've submitted your GIS data attachment. And if there's no problems with it, they can view it on our map at that point. If there is a problem, they will also get a notification. And that is when we're going to try to do better about reaching out to operators, at least early on now, to help them troubleshoot, because oftentimes a lot of the problems are very simple. And once you have had a chance to submit something and see how it works correctly, I think then from then on going forward, you shouldn't have a problem submitting any GIS data attachments. But initially, getting the hang of it and getting the process down, there's some little tricky steps involved. So once the data attachments have been submitted, I just wanted to highlight the disclosure aspects of it. So as far as it's showing up on our interactive map to you and to the public, for the various forms, at various stages, so basically in process and approved, they will show up for many of the forms. For the Form 12 and Form 44, because of confidentiality and restrictions in the rules, these will only show up on the public map once they've been approved by COGCC staff, and only at scales of greater than 1 to 6,000. We do plan to make aggregate data sets for the GIS data we're receiving available for download, and hopefully in the near future. Again, this will be with the exception of Form 12 and Form 44 because of confidentiality. So that's all I have at this point, and I guess I would welcome questions. And again, I'll highlight going to the guidance document, which should be with all the other guidance in the mission change table. So take a look at that. And finally, before I stop, I wanted to introduce our new GIS analyst, David Gates. He started with us in April, and I'm very happy to have him on board, and he should be able to help answer some questions and provide guidance, especially when I get too busy and don't get back to people promptly. So please welcome David, and feel free to reach out to him as well if you have questions. So that's it, Hannah. So are there any questions at this point?
We're going to take questions at the end, but the only thing that anybody really put was that the link to the GIS document in the operator guidance mission change tab does not work on the website. So I guess you could look into that.
Okay.
But any other questions, just chat them in. We'll take those at the end. And let's see, next
okay.
We have Rule 915, the soil sampling and analysis, contaminants of concern reduction. And I believe Rick Allison is going to be doing that one. So just give me one moment to pull his presentation up. I believe this is it. Oh, no, not that. That's not what we're doing. Sorry, guys. There you go. Oh, and let me share as well. That would probably help. All right, there we go. Rick, take it away.
Thanks, Hannah. I'm Rick Allison. I'm an environmental protection specialist for Northern Colorado. We just released a, Hannah, you could move to the next slide, please. We just released a guidance document specific to Rule 915E to C, which covers analytical requirements for characterizing spills and releases or potential impacts to soil and groundwater. So this guidance focuses specifically on soil analysis, and in particular, the guidance is geared towards a spill or a discovery of impact from a release. It's not necessarily tailored to the facility closure document where you know, it's unknown whether there's impacts or not, and so those situations have approved work plans where an operator would state their analyte list. So again, this is kind of after there's a known spill or release or discovery of impact. It also really just focuses on produced water and hydrocarbons. You know, there may be other E&P waste streams, but produced water and hydrocarbons are the main spilled materials that we're dealing with. And then we'll talk a little bit about when to get the characterization sample and where to collect that, as well as how to make the reduction request. The next slide, Hannah, please. And this is just the rule citation for a point of reference. So really the starting point in characterizing a spill or release of any spilled E&P waste is the full table 915-1. The rule does provide the operators an opportunity to request a reduced list of contaminants of concern. And so, but any change or reduction to the complete table 915-1 does require approval from the director in advance. And it's incumbent on the operators to make the request and provide their evidence. The next slide. And this is excerpted from the statement of basis and purpose, which gives a little more context into the reasoning behind the rule. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to that first line. You know, a modification of the list of contaminants of concern needs to be equally or more protective of air, soil, water, and biological resources. That can give you some idea of the guide that staff has in making conservative decisions in this regard. Whoops. Did we lose?
I'm sorry about that.
The slides, Hannah? No worries.
Are they here? Is this the one we're supposed to be on the citation, or is it this one, the statement of basis?
Statement of basis and purpose. Yeah.
Okay. I apologize.
Okay. No, not a problem. And then the second point from the statement of basis and purpose is to attain approval of an alternate I don't think it's supposed to be standard, but an alternate list of contaminants of concern. The operator needs to demonstrate that those contaminants are not present, or they have another reason to believe that a contaminant should not be analyzed. And we can move on to the next slide now. So here's our starting point for produced water sampling. These would be spills to soil that are produced water only, or maybe they're commingled. It's produced water and something else, commonly oil or condensate. It's also likely going to apply to historical releases with unknown fluids. Those are commonly have to be assumed to be commingled if you don't know the actual source at a tank, battery, flow line, or wellhead, or a pit, for example. In those cases, you're going to be required to sample the complete table 915-1 as a starting point. We can move to the next slide. And that just elaborates the table 915 requirements for produced water sampling, or a commingled spill sampling requirement. So soil TPH, the full list of organic compounds, soil suitability for reclamation, as well as the metals. And we know, by the nature of soil that it naturally contains metals, and most of us know that arsenic in particular naturally occurs in soil in Colorado at a concentration that exceeds our cleanup standards. So therefore, operators are going to, by necessity, have to take background samples for comparison of naturally occurring site-specific background concentrations of metals to compare to the metals results from their spills. They may also want to take samples from background for soil suitability, depending on where you are in the state, and because we do consider background results for soil suitability parameters as well. And the next slide. One instance that we will grant some relief on up front is spills where it's known that the spilled fluids are limited to hydrocarbons only. So these are almost always going to be recent spills, and you know that, for example, it was only a crude oil spill from a tank, or you have some other way of verifying that it's not been mixed with produced water, in which case you can eliminate sampling for metals and soil suitability if it's a hydrocarbon only spill. And so that reduces your analysis to just soil TPH as well as the organic compounds listed in table 915-1. The next slide. So if there's a recent spill, the most effective way to characterize the spill is to collect a sample as soon as possible from the most highly impacted material that you have on site in the spill area. That's especially important for organics and TPH, so we don't lose too much of the concentration to volatilization or some other migration. In the case of a historical release discovered, we want to seek out the most impacted material that's actually going to be hauled off and disposed, not necessarily the soil confirmation sidewall samples from an excavation, for example, that you're collecting to document cleanup, because those samples theoretically will not have concentrations of the contaminants of concern in them, or they'll be very low, as opposed to the impacted material. And we want that impacted material taken as soon as it can possibly be collected as well, as opposed to from a stockpile, say, that's been maybe sitting on the losing, especially the organics, to volatilization. And we can move to the next slide.
So
sorry about
she's
that.
back.
I had a weird
she's back.
whole situation happen there, but it looks like I'm back. Let me reshare that real quick. Sorry about that. I'm having to use my mobile service since there's no Wi-Fi where I am at.
Yep, we'd just ask that everybody have patience today because Hannah is hosting this meeting from her vacation. So we really appreciate her being here, and and thanks. So
yeah,
everybody bear with us.
All right, I think this is the right one. Is this the right one, Rick?
Oh, yeah, yes, that looks right.
Okay,
thanks.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
So there's really two formats an operator can use to submit their request for analysis reduction. For a recent spill, that would happen on a Form 19 supplemental report. And we want to see a summary table of the waste characterization results, the actual laboratory analytical report, and a site map, especially if including background samples at this point in the process. And again, submit that information as soon as possible during the cleanup. If you may not have it within your 10-day required supplemental report, but you can always submit another one right behind that, just with more information. Historic releases or an ongoing investigation, a larger remediation or a spill remediation that takes longer than 90 days is provided in the rule. You'll submit the information on either a Form 27 initial with your initial work plan for the remediation, or possibly a supplemental report if you already have a remediation open. And basically, we're looking for the same set of data. And now we can move to the next slide. So I have a couple examples on these slides of some spills that came in early on. This was a recent spill that was a produced water and oil mixture. And for organics, you can see fairly high concentrations of TPH detected, as well as the volatiles, and then a handful of PAHs. And basically, the operator requested a reduction in analyte sampling, and we agreed that they could do that. And the target analytes would be anything that was detected in the waste sample. So it's important to note, and you go back to the statement of basis and purpose, that in most cases, we're going to request operators to continue to analyze for those constituents detected in the sample, even if they're at a low concentration, because they are present. And the characterization samples are kind of a snapshot of what the waste might be. And in particular, the historical releases, we're dealing with lower concentrations, and we have to be conservative in our decisions. So we're going to continue to ask for anything that was detected to continue to be analyzed. In the next slide, Hannah will show us the inorganic parameters. This was a mixture of, again, produced water and oil, but the soil suitability parameters in the waste were fairly low. And the operator also supplied background data to show that they had high pH and natural soil in the area. So the operator was allowed to eliminate soil suitability sampling from their confirmation cleanup samples. And then you can see their arsenic sample is also below their site-specific background. And the remaining metals in the waste samples will be from, were already below our cleanup standards, so they were eliminated. The complete list of metals was eliminated as well. And we have one more example on the next couple slides. So this was a historical release at a tank battery. You can see the concentrations are a lot lower. And again, just want to point out that anything that was detected for organics in that sample, including PAHs that may be below even the groundwater sites screening levels, will continue to need to be analyzed to confirm cleanup. And the next slide. And for inorganics at this location, see there were no background samples yet, so we're either going to need to get background samples to compare those metals, or that are highlighted in particular because they're over the Table 915 standards, as well as potentially background samples to compare to the soil suitability standards, or the operator will need to continue to analyze for those and show that they've removed those exceeded soil suitability parameters. And I think that might be all. One more slide, Hannah. Yeah, so we can take questions at the end, and again, the guidance document should be released soon if it's not already on the mission change guidance document page on the website, and you can contact me with any questions that don't come up today. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Rick. And we will take questions at the end, and I see people have been chatting them in, so everyone just keep chatting in your questions and we'll grab those at the end. And next up, we have Form 43 and the COENV database revisions. Arthur Kopsel, and just give me a moment to get that up. Form 43, there we go. All right, Arthur, if you are ready, you can take it away.
There we go. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm Arthur Kopsel, and I'm an environmental protection specialist at COGCC, and my primary function is maintaining the COENV database and reviewing all the analytical data that we receive under the COGCC rules and any other data that we acquire. So can you go to the next slide, please? So just as a quick reminder, what the Form 43 is the Form 43 is our analytical sample form, and it's used to upload laboratory analytical data pursuant to COGCC rules. In particular, with our new rules, it'll be 411, 420, 614, 615, 805, 907, 909J, and we also accept data for some of our policies and form conditions of approval. And currently, I just went through our list of new rules, and we'll still accept data under the old rules as well. So rules such as 318, AF, 608, 609. And then also as a reminder, all our analytical data must be submitted through the Form 43 using an approved EDD format. And we have two formats, one being an Excel-based format and one is an XML format. And the benefit of the Form 43 is it provides a documentation that an operator has uploaded the data pursuant to whatever rule, policy, or condition of approval it was sampled and submitted for. Next slide, please. So some of the revisions for the new form, since the new rules went into effect, we're changing the language in the form to accommodate 411, 420, 614, 615, 805, 907, and 909J. Let's see, the other one of the other revisions is that in the past, the form only allowed information to be submitted either under an API number or a COGCC facility ID number, which might be something like a location ID number or a pit ID number or waste management or EMP waste management number. And the revised form will allow initial Form 19 so spill reports and initial Form 27s to use those numbers as identifying number. So anything submitted under those numbers will be stored in the site investigation or spill report documents. And lastly, a section was specifically added to accept data related to Rule 909J, and that's produced water quality analysis for wells that produce water to pits. Next slide, please. So to access the new form, it's kind of just like it was before. You can access it through the quick links on the COGCC website or through the link that I've included in this. And it is important to remember that you will have to have a eForm username and password to access the form. And in the past, we've had a little bit of an issue with some people's usernames and passwords for eForms working in the database. So please let me know if that is a problem you are having. Next slide, please. And once you're entered, the user will have to confirm their contact information in the form. And it's important to note that the facility, that when you fill out this part of the form, that the operator number be filled out correctly. Because if you move on to the next stage, you will not be able to find any of your facilities under anybody else's operator number. Next slide, please. Let's see, so the new Prepare Forms option page. This is the page where you can select what you're actually going to submit for. And most of the changes here were to the language in the form. Hopefully it's a little more instructional, so it's easier to figure out what you want to do and how to get it done correctly the first time. And then you can see down toward the bottom is the section that we added toward 909J. Next slide, please. See, one of the big significant changes was maiden identification numbers, as I kind of said earlier. So when you are preparing your forms and you select the little blue pencil on the right, it'll take you to the identification number search. And that is where you can enter your initial Form 19 or 27 document number, or as before, an API number or facility ID number. Next slide, please. Is Hannah going? Next slide, please, Hannah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I clicked it.
Okay.
It didn't go.
Oh, back a couple there. I think we got a little too far.
Back. Let's see. Go 1, 2. How about this one? Or the one before this?
Back one. Let's go back one just to be sure. Okay. No, back a little bit more. Okay. Then forward one.
Okay.
All right. So then, like I also said earlier, we made some modifications for the 909J. And this form was modified to accept the analytical data and operator pit inspections that are required under 909J. And we made this whole separate section so that when you, so that all you can do with this is the 909J. So if you click on the upload 909J sample data, it will take you to the pit facility search down there. And it will search for pits under the operator number that you entered earlier. So once you select the pit ID, it'll take you to the next step. So next slide, please, Hannah. And so in order to submit the analytical data, operators will have to complete the pit inspection information. And it's just a very basic pit inspection the day it was inspected. And at the time, was the pit lined, unlined, fenced, netted, just the very basics about the pit. And if there's more information that you think you need to provide, you can provide it as an attachment to your samples. And next slide, please. See, so that's about all I really have. Those are the major changes that you're going to see. Any changes that were made within the database itself won't be seen on the outside. So I'm not really going to go over those very much. They were just changes to accommodate the changes to the form. So if you have any, there's going to be additional information and instructions within the COGCC Form 43 page at the link there. They were not updated quite as rapidly, I was like, so the new updated instructions and guidance documents weren't there this morning when I checked, but they should be there shortly. And next slide, please. And if there's any questions, you can email me or you give me a call. I'll try and answer your call. I may not answer the call right away, but if you leave me a message, I will get back to you. I think that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Arthur. All right, next up we have geological hazard plans with James Hicks. I'll go ahead and get that queued. And then if you have any questions for Arthur, just put those in the chat and we will get to those at the end.
Hi, Hannah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Excellent.
Okay.
Geological hazards. There you go.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, I'm James Hicks, Oil and Gas Location Assessment Specialist. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the geologic hazards map and geologic hazards plan attachments to the Form 2A. Next slide, please, Hannah. I'm going to give an overview of the geologic hazards map and the geologic hazards plan. The guidance document should be uploaded to our website. The geologic hazards map is a required attachment under Rule 304B7I. The geologic hazards plan is only required if there are geologic hazards that are identified during the preparation of the geologic hazards map under Rule 304C21. The term geologic hazard is a defined term under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 2465.1, 103.8. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the purpose of the geologic hazard map and the plan is to protect public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. The map requires that you show the working pad surface of the oil and gas location and also a 1 mile radius around the working pad surface and include all geologic hazards or any geologic hazards that are identified within that 1 mile. The second purpose for this is to consider those hazards and risks that they may pose to the oil and gas location and surrounding area. And then determine ways to avoid or minimize or mitigate any identified geologic hazards. And finally, demonstrate that the oil and gas operations at a proposed oil and gas location will not be adversely impacted by geologic hazards. Next slide, please, Hannah. So under the Colorado Revised Statutes, a geologic hazard is defined as a geologic phenomenon which is so adverse to past, current, or foreseeable construction or land use as to constitute a significant hazard to public health, safety, or to the property. The takeaway here, the key word is significant hazard. We're looking for things that are reasonable, that would maybe reasonably be within that area. You may look at maybe county mitigation plans that may identify geologic hazards. There's also a geologic hazard or a geologic tab on our Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission GIS online map. There's a geology tab that has some layers. Next slide, please, Hannah. So under the definition of geologic hazards, they include but are not limited to the following: avalanches, landslides, rock slides, mud flows, unstable or potentially unstable slopes, seismic effects, radioactivity, and ground subsidence. Again, we're looking for things that might reasonably be found in that area. So avalanches are not something that we would expect in Weld County, but certainly avalanches do occur in parts of Garfield County. So those kind of things are what we would be looking for in a given area. Notice that the definition says are not limited to. The definition is not meant to be exclusive. So it's pretty broad. We're looking to understand what the operator is looking, at to evaluate hazards. What hazards did you evaluate? So that's important to put on the map. Next slide, please, Hannah. So under Colorado Revised Statutes 2341-208, any report that's required by law or rule and prepared as a result of or based on a geologic study or geologic data or contains information relating to geology and is to be presented or prepared for any state agency, political subdivision of the state, or recognized state or local board or commission shall be prepared by a professional geologist. This has been on the books for since the late 60s, early 70s. So what is a professional geologist? Next slide, please, Hannah. Under that same Colorado Revised Statute, the definition of a professional geologist is a person engaged in the practice of geology who is a graduate of an institution of higher education and which is accredited by a regional or national accrediting agency with a minimum of 30 semester or 45 quarter hours of undergraduate or graduate work in the field of geology, and whose post-baccalaureate training has been in the field of geology with a specific record of additional 5 years of geological experience to include no more than 2 years of graduate work. So I know, I and others are professional geologists in other states like Wyoming or Utah. Colorado does not currently license or register geologists. If you are a professional geologist in another state, you could use that to support evidence that you have the working experience for the 5 years of geologic experience and also the educational background. But we're not looking for a stamp or a seal on these documents. We will have a self-certification statement that's included in the guidance that says that you meet these qualifications and that you're endorsing or supporting the submittal of that document. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the professional geologist will present results on the geologic studies or data reviewed for any hazards identified within 1 mile radius of the working pad surface. Indicate the hazards evaluated, specify or specific resources used, and sign the self-certification statement. What we're looking for is, an indication of what hazards were identified or evaluated and what resources were used to evaluate those hazards. The geologic hazards plan is only required if hazards are identified within that 1 mile radius of the working pad surface. And the plan should present mitigation measures for those hazards that are identified within that 1 mile. Also, if you're requesting a lesser impact area exemption, and Sabrina will talk about this a little bit more in her presentation. If you're requesting a lesser impact area exemption, that also needs to be prepared by a professional geologist and state why the request is being made to not submit the geologic hazard map or the geologic hazard plan. Next slide, please, Hannah. And that concludes my presentation. Do we have, I guess we'll have questions at the end.
Great, thanks, James. Yes, we'll answer questions at the end. So anyone who has questions can just chat those into the chat box and we will get right to those. Next up, we have lesser impact areas with Sabrina Trask. And I will just make that transition while Sabrina comes on. There it is. All right, Sabrina, you're all ready.
Thanks, Hannah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sabrina Trask, the Senior OGLA Specialist. I have a really short presentation, but with a really big reminder about requesting lesser impact area exemptions. Next slide, please, Hannah. So now that we have a few OGDPs and Form 2As undergoing completeness review, we're seeing a really consistent trend in operators requesting lesser impact area exemptions for plans and attachments that are not actually required for a given location. This means that operators are spending time working up exemption request letters. Staff is spending time reviewing these requests and determining they are unnecessary. And it's causing quite a few of the Form 2As to be returned to draft for corrections on the lesser impact area exemption request attachment. Next slide, please, Hannah. So there's a really simple solution to this problem, which is to submit only those exemption requests that actually apply to your location. The first thing you want to do is to determine whether or not the plan or attachment or information is even required for your particular location. So start by reading the rules. If the plan or attachment is not required, there is no need to request an exemption from it. Next slide, please. So when you read the rules closely, you'll see that some plans and attachments are always required on the Form 2A. For these required items, you're going to want to either simply attach the plan, or if the resource is not present, you may request the lesser impact area exemption. Other plans and attachments are only required on the Form 2A if the location meets certain conditions that are described by the rules. So if the location meets those rule-based conditions, then you need to either attach the plan or request the exemption. If your location, though, does not meet those rule-based conditions, then that means the plan or attachment is not required, and there's no need to request the exemption. Next slide, please. So the first column of this table gives some examples of plans and attachments that are always required. In these cases, you'll either attach the plan or attachment, or you'll request the exemption if you deem that's appropriate. The column on the right gives some examples of plans and attachments that are conditionally required. So for example, even though the noise mitigation plan is always required, the odor mitigation plan is only required when the working pad surface is within 2,000 feet of a building unit or a designated outside activity area. So just because they're both potential nuisance issues, it doesn't mean that they're both automatically required. The noise mitigation plan is always required. The odor mitigation plan is only conditionally required. Next slide, please, Hannah. So to summarize, my advice to you is read the rule, figure out if your plan or attachment is required for your particular location and the conditions of that location. If the plan is required, either attach it or submit the lesser impact area exemption request if you believe that the resource of concern is not present or that the impacts to the resource will be so minimal as to pose no concern. This is straight from Rule 304D. You can find more information in the operator guidance document for Rule 304D. That was actually posted to our website back in, I think, February. You can find it under the Form 2A guidance and instruction page or under the mission change guidance page. Next slide, please, Hannah. That's all I have for the lesser impact areas. Exemption request. I'm happy to take questions, but before I go, I do want to just give a very late announcement, and I apologize I didn't have this announcement ready at the beginning of today's training. We are still working on guidance, but I wanted to make sure that everyone knows that every Form 2C, that's the OGDP certification form, every Form 2C must have an OGDP map attachment. I apologize, we don't have our guidance yet. We're still working on it. It's coming soon. That OGDP map should have, it should be a recent aerial image, and it should show the proposed locations and the mineral development area. So an aerial photo showing your location and your DSU, basically. That's not a rule-based requirement, but it will be required by the forthcoming guidance document. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions on that until the guidance comes out. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sabrina. And now we will get on to the questions. So because of that interruption in service, it looks like I don't have the questions from earlier. So I'm trying to access those real quick right now. Oh, look, here they are. Oh, and now it says my internet connection is unstable. All right, well, hopefully everything will just be fine. Just give me a minute to pull these up. Okay, the first question is 412.A.4, notice of subsequent operations. An operator will provide to the service owner or the service owner's appointed agent and the relevant local government at least 7 days advance notice of subsequent operations with a rig or heavy equipment that will materially impact surface areas beyond the existing access road or oil and gas location, including but not limited to all operations listed in Rule 312A. What is materially impact referring to? And then there's a couple, oh, and then somebody has the answer. So whoever wants to answer that, go ahead with that answer.
Yep. And I can jump in on that. Thanks. Hi, Greg Duranlo, Environmental Manager. So the materially impacted surface outside of the oil and gas location, that could include any work outside the boundaries of the oil and gas location as defined by the edge of disturbance. So any materials handling operations, E&P waste management operations like spill investigation and remediation, land treatment or land application, any operations in which the land surface will be disturbed, or operations which could impede the surface owner's use of the land outside the oil and gas location should be noticed to the surface owner. For locations which have already undergone interim reclamation, disturbance outside that what we're calling informally the production operations area, but within the original oil and gas location should likely be noticed back to the surface owners also. So when in doubt, notify the surface owner. If you're going to affect their normal use of the surface, you should certainly be in contact with them. And we have responded to complaints in the past on that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. The next question is, what scenarios would you need to send a surface owner notification on? Did you just answer that question or no? No.
I think that's kind of a subpart. And the person asking the question went on to ask, the scenario we are currently working with right now is completing a drilled but uncompleted or duck well on a pad that has never had interim reclamation done. So there will be no additional pad or road construction. And so reoccupation to complete your ducts is an operation that requires a Form 4 sundry notice under Rule 312A. And therefore, under Rule 412A, it should also be noticed to the surface owner. Again, when in doubt, notify the surface owner.
Great, thanks, Greg. And then the next question was about the link to the GIS document and the operator guidance not working, and I believe that's been fixed now. And then there was a separate question that says, the table also no longer allows you to sort by date from type, alphabetical order any longer. When I try to click the date header to sort newer guidance to the top of the table, it kicks me back to the regulations page. It used to sort the most recent documents to the top of the table. Chris,
I'll just jump in on that real quick. And we tested, so Chris did fix the link to the document, and sorry about that. And then we did test the functionality of that table. It still worked for most of us. So you might try clearing your cache if you're having trouble with that and reopening the page, just because there's been some work done to that page. So keep trying, hopefully that works. If you do continue to have problems with that, let us know.
Greg, do you know if it works better in like Google Chrome or Internet Explorer? Because I know sometimes some things just will not function in one or the other. Well, we know it works well in Chrome.
I was testing it in Chrome, but I don't know.
Okay, cool. And the next question is, so to confirm, COGCC would like an initial characterization sample for the most impacted material for organics and TPH for each and every spill.
Thanks, Hannah. You only need to do the initial characterization sample on a spill if the operator wants to request a reduction of analytes. So you could proceed with cleanup, collect confirmation soil samples, and analyze those samples for the complete table 915-1 without doing the characterization sample. And you could follow the statement in the guidance about if it's a known hydrocarbon spill, you could reduce that without the characterization sample to only TPH and organics and soil. So that would be the way to avoid the characterization sample. But we do want that on every spill if the operator is going to be requesting a reduction in analytes for that spill.
Great, thank you, Rick. The next question is for Arthur. Mr. Kopsel, for the Form 43s, will you update the reason for sampling question to include these new rules/policies so that we can ensure being tracked for the correct sampling? Additionally, will PIT ID numbers be acceptable rather than AIP or facility ID numbers for 909J sampling? Or will we have to connect the 909J sample data to an API/facility ID number?
Okay, for the first one, yes, I will update all the sample reasons. And if there is something that's missing or you need something, please just send me an email and let me know, and I will make sure that it gets put in there into the list so it's available. And if I understand the second part right, for Rule 909J sampling with the Form 43, you will always want to use a PIT ID number only to submit all the data through the form. But then for each individual sample that comes from a well, you will want to use the well facility ID number or PIT ID number in the sample data for the facility. So you'll want to, since each well is then the sample point, you will want to use the facility ID for that well in the sample. And if that didn't answer your question, please let me know.
Awesome, thank you, Arthur. Yeah, if you need further clarification, just put it in the chat and we will clarify away. The next question is, if there is a geological hazard that is identified within 1 mile of the WPS that does not impact construction or operations at OGL, is a geological hazard plan required?
Answer that, I think. Geologic hazard plan is required if the hazard is deemed significant. The operator in PG can submit a plan that discusses mitigation measures for that hazard and also provide information as to the nature of that hazard. Or they may choose to submit a lesser impact area exemption request, and you would still, along those same lines, provide information as to the evaluation of those hazards and why they're not significant to the development.
Okay, thank you. Great. And the next question is, geohazard map and plan. Why is a professional geologist's self-certification required if no geohazards exist within a mile? For the forms 2Cs already submitted, are you requiring an OGDP map before staff will approve?
Hannah, you kind of mixed two questions there.
Sorry.
James, do you want to take that PG question first?
I was going to say I can answer the first part of that. The reason for the self-certification for the PG on geologic hazard maps and geologic hazard plans where there are no hazards identified, I guess it would be the map. The reason for that is that it needs to be somebody that's qualified, you know, by education and by work experience that makes that determination. So they need to go through and evaluate those hazards, and we need to know, since the definition is somewhat open-ended, it's not, you know, limited to those hazards in the list. We need to know what hazards were evaluated and what resources were used to evaluate those hazards. So it needs to be a qualified person to make that statement. I hope that answers that.
All right, and then the second question was, for the Form 2Cs already submitted, are you requiring an OGDP map before the staff will approve?
Hi, Hannah. Yeah, this is Sabrina. I'll take that one. Yes, we are still going to require the OGDP map for a Form 2C that's already been submitted. Go ahead and reach out to whoever the OGLA staff member is, who is the lead OGLA on your OGDP. You can just email them the map and we'll attach it for you. The reason for the urgency on that is because since the OGDP map will go on the Form 2C, it has to be attached prior to the director making her completeness determination. Remember that when completeness determination is made, the Form 2C actually gets approved. It doesn't go into process like the 2A and the 2B. So yes, please send us your OGDP map if you have a Form 2C that's already in our shop. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Sabrina. The next question is, after initial characterization sampling, is a Form 27 supplemental required with approval to request reducing the list of analytes to only those detected initially prior to confirmation sampling? Or for expediency of remediation, can operators sample for only detected analytes without specific approval for a reduced analyte list? F27's approval can understandably take some time, but can delay completion of remedial excavations.
So the rules does say that if an operator believes it's appropriate to modify the list of contaminants of concern, the operator will submit and obtain director's approval of a modified list of contaminants of concern through a Form 19 or 27. So per rule, that request does need to be made and approved by the director. An operator can always submit the data on the 19 or 27 and call or email the EPS who's reviewing that to elevate the review of that particular data for so that we don't delay remediation projects. That's an option. I would say proceeding without approval is taken at risk that the data supplied may not be adequate, and they could have to go back and collect additional data at the end of the remediation or at a later date.
Okay. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I muted you instead of unmuting me. All right. Thank you, Rick. The next question is for James. Did you say a geological hazard map is always required, but the plan is only required if you encounter a hazard?
A geologic hazard map is required by rule. An operator can request a lesser impact area exemption if you know, in discussion with a professional geologist, it's determined that there are no geologic hazards within 1 mile of the working pad surface. That's certainly a way to approach it. Again, just needs to be a qualified person that makes that assessment and in collaboration with the operator.
All right, great. Thank you, James. And the next question is, during closure of tank batteries and wellheads, if only metal exceedances exist in soils with no evidence of organic impacts, non-detect for all organic constituents, are operators expected to remediate for those metal exceedances? And then there's a separate question also. Do you want me to say the separate question, or do you want to answer that question?
I guess I could start, Hannah. Thanks. Yeah, I guess it's all one question. So yeah, are background samples the only way to clear metal exceedances, or can operators request to leave metals in soils in situ with delineation of extents similar to guidance for soil suitability? No. Operators will need to collect background samples to demonstrate that the metals, concentrations that they're leaving in place either comply with site-specific background in soil or with Table 915-1. Those metals concentrations are health-based standards, and soil suitability levels are not health-based standards, they're reclamation standards. So that's the big difference there. That the soil suitability is not designed to necessarily protect public health so much as to ensure successful reclamation of the site.
All right, excellent. And that looks like the last question. Let's see, that was answered at a few seconds ago. Oh, there's another one. Is the term significant hazard defined by regulation? I'm hoping that was audible because I had a terrible echo on my end. James, I think that one might. Oh, go ahead.
Hannah, sorry, I'll jump in on that. Significant is not defined, but is a commonly used term. And so, you know, geologic hazard, we're going to rest on the definition of geologic hazard as James suggested earlier. And there was an interim question in there, still needing clarification. If an operator requests a lesser impact area exemption for a required map or plan, does the map or plan still need to be attached to the Form 2A? And no, if the lesser impact area exemption is being sought, do not attach the map or plan from which you are requesting the exemption. If you choose to attach the plan, you know, and your plan addresses any concerns, you don't need to request the lesser impact area exemption.
Great, thank you, Greg. And we'll just hang around a little longer to see if any questions come in. I will go ahead and make the transition to the old one so that we can see when the next meeting is.
Looks like we do have another question for Rick clarifying. Oh no, yeah. Sorry, that was already covered. Okay. My bad. Oh, no, there is maybe a
it's okay.
Another
I'll
clarifying question for Rick.
I see that, Greg.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read it. So just some clarification, okay. Rick. If background samples do not clear metal exceedances, operators should dig and haul soil and chase those metal exceedances.
I would say we might be getting into site-specific question territory here, and that those instances are probably best addressed directly with the area EPS or an environmental supervisor as they come up, because it's not an exceedingly common issue. It may be in some areas of the state, in which case it's better to talk to the area EPS.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you, Rick. And Ryan agrees. And we'll just hang on for a little longer to see if any other questions come in. Folks, you can just chat your questions if you have any other ones. All right, I will go ahead and wrap up though. So thank you everybody for coming. And the next operator training and meeting will be on Tuesday, July 13th. And I'll be sending out an email to you, hopefully with the correct month on it, just prior to that, either that Thursday, Friday, or potentially Monday, depending on how things shake out. And oh, if you would like to be added to that operator email list so that you can get those blasts that I send, my email is right there at the bottom. Make sure you get that last name right, otherwise I will not get that email. And I think the questions have dried up. So yeah, thank you everybody for being here.
Hannah?
Oh yeah, Jane, go ahead.
Just one note. So right now, the current plan for the next operator meeting which is on July 13th, is to focus primarily on web form training. Our plans are to switch from the eForm interface to a new updated web form interface starting in August. As a lot of you know, eForms is based on the Silverlight platform, which is going away. No longer supported by Microsoft, and as you know, it's not supported on most browsers anymore. So we will be switching to web forms for all of our electronic forms submittals starting in early August. So we'll provide some training on that in July. That's it. Thanks, Hannah. Sorry.
Awesome. No, Jane, thank you. I'm so glad that you mentioned that so that folks can be excited about that July 13th training. And all right, no more questions. So hope everybody has a great day and take care. Bye.
Thanks, Hannah.